We've reached the final stage. Playoffs are just around the corner. First stop, play-ins. In what may end up being our final season together, the stakes have never been higher. For the teams trying to capture their first, and perhaps only trophy, it could be your last chance. 7 teams in the West will compete for a flight to Toronto, and only 2 make the cut. Let's take a look at the bracket. In the West, things are a little funky this year. 7 teams total are participating. Boston and Vancouver get a first round bye, and will await the winners of London versus Shock, and Toronto versus Washington / NYXL respectively. The reason I say slash is because Washington and NYXL are playing in a single elimination win or go home game to decide the lowest seed in the tournament. In other words, somebody is walking away empty-handed with no second chance. Before getting into my predictions, it's important that we give all of these teams recognition for at least making it this far, and talk about their probability of success, because obviously there are some clear favorites. The one team that everybody and their mother has advancing is, of course, Boston. Talent-wise, they are currently in a tier of their own compared to the rest of this group. They've clearly been the best team. The only team that you'd even consider them being maybe afraid of is Toronto Defiant, and that might even be a stretch. If they don't qualify for the playoffs with this road ahead of them, I personally will make a video straight up laughing at them for their failures. Anything less than making it to playoffs is unacceptable. Perhaps not far behind, though, could be Toronto themselves. A new meta has given them a new look at life. Behind their full commitment to Alari and Kaluj out of Winston Jail and the power of friendship, they've become a force to be reckoned with. Supposedly, they're one of the teams to beat in scrims right now, and I'd believe it. Toronto in the current meta is tough to crack. There's some big-time comfort going for them. Majed's mechanics, Kaluj's Sigurissa, and Spectra and his large appendage are a tough team to stop. They're very dangerous, they're hot at the right time, and they have the home crowd waiting for them. There's a lot of pressure on them to perform with those kinds of stakes on the line, but they're right where they want to be to make this happen. Boston and Toronto are certainly the favorites here. As for the rest of the lot, it's a bit more of a toss-up. None of them boast the roster strength of Boston or the comfort zone of Toronto, but they each do have individual strengths and weaknesses. London are a bit of a wild card in this situation. You know what you're going to get with how they play. Hadi's going to be a Giga Chad on the Rhine, and there's nothing you can do to stop him. The London Spitfire play a very unorthodox playstyle compared to the rest of the league. Add in an unbreakable amount of chemistry, and it takes an all-around team effort to really put these guys down for good. Genuinely, they might have the 3rd highest odds of making it out of the play-ins, although that honor may also belong to the Justice. The Washington Justice have been pretty up and down this season, but they never seem to fail to be competitive against the respectable opponents of the league. alexyOWL alone makes these guys a threat. This man wins fights all by himself. He's a magician in the Overwatch scene. If he gets hot and the team takes advantage of his openings, then they could very easily punch a ticket to the playoffs. They're well coached and are in a pretty decent meta that encourages aggressive support play, which is perfect for a guy like Teru. If him and alexyOWL can channel that 2022 playoff energy, the Justice have a shot at this. Someone else in that middle tier you want to monitor is the Shock. Max, Probe, and Finn have shown some signs of life recently, and let's be honest, when Proper's on your team, there's always a chance of winning. The Shock have been quiet for pretty much all season, in very disappointing fashion. They're kind of overdue for a big week, and this just might be the one. The Shock, on paper at least, could probably defeat most of the opponents in this bracket, maybe outside of Boston. A Shock team that people don't believe in honestly sounds scarier than one that people have expectations for. The less pressure they feel, the worse off the rest of this league is. They're not invincible by any means, and they definitely do have questions, like with that revolving door main support, plus their Lucio issues, amongst other things, but every week is different. And if Krusty can learn from his mistakes and get back in that kitchen and cook up some kind of Gordon Ramsay level masterpiece, the Shock just might sneak out of this. Then there's what I consider to be the lowest tier in this bracket. First is the Titans. My confidence in them is probably the lowest of any team here. The Titans are one of the higher seeds, yes, but the meta just doesn't seem to be clicking for them. They're somewhat limited in what they can do. The hit scan situation is not great. They don't play a lot of Orisa, and double flex is simply not an option. The good news for Titans fans is they do have a solid team to help make up for it. In spite of a tough meta, they are full of consistent performers. If Sugarfree, Heesang, and Crimzo continue to carry, it's very doable always. There's not a single player that you consider to be poor on this Titans team. Worries or not, consistency might be a reliable path to success. The only question is it enough? Then there's the final challenger, the New York Excelsior. They are the least proven of the 7 teams in this bracket. They're the ones that tend to slip up the most of this group. However, the weakest ones can often be the ones you end up fearing the most. New York face little to no pressure in this tournament. If they lose, then it doesn't matter because they weren't even supposed to be here in the first place. And if they win, there's no telling how far they could go. And let's not forget who their coach is. Changun has gone on some of the most improbable playoff runs in league history. If anybody can surpass expectations, it's always him. They may be the weakest team on paper, but you wouldn't catch me dead saying that they have zero chance in this thing, especially if they get by the Justice. This roster is something you can't underestimate. Fitz can be a very dominant player when hot, Kellen is super versatile, and Creative might be the most slept on support in the entire league. It's just a matter of putting 2 and 2 together and actually beating a top team when there's stakes. They're the group with the most to prove arguably, but also the lowest expectations. Now for my bracket preds. So the play-ins are 2 weeks long and we won't know the final result until then, but here's my initial thinking before we get any results, and of course we can reconvene next week if changes are needed. So I'm picking the Boston Uprising and Toronto Defiant to make the playoffs. I'd like to say something crazy happens, but the fact is, Boston shouldn't even be here to begin with. They're more talented than all the other participants. Boston do occasionally like to play down to their competition, which is something to keep in mind, but it's doubtful that they choke multiple opportunities away. And Toronto just makes sense. They're one of the hottest teams in the league, and going off history, it's usually the teams that play well late down the stretch in the regular season that tend to perform exceptionally well come playoff time. Plus, this Toronto team is ultra confident. They seem to be peaking right now. They're one of the best at the new meta, and I have a hard time believing that anybody outside of Boston could possibly crack that playstyle. I think that Boston are going to take care of business in the upper bracket, while Toronto get through in the losers final. I don't know if there's anything that can be considered a surprise in this bracket unless like Boston lose out or NYXL somehow make it, but I think there are a lot of teams that have a fair chance at this. Boston and Toronto are certainly the heavy favorites, but Justice, Shock, and London could all be in contention as well. This week in particular, I think that Justice are gonna eliminate NYXL right off the bat. They're just the better team with higher aspirations. I think that NYXL are very interesting, and their flexibility is underrated, but I have a feeling this game might come down to a Fitz versus alphaYi carry-off, and if that's the case, alphaYi just tends to do that more consistently, so Justice should have the better odds. After that, I'm going out on a limb, and I'm saying that the Shock finally proved the doubters wrong with a big win against London. The Shock getting hot at the right time is basically a tale as old as time. Not to mention that London like to choke away winnable games. It would be very fitting to witness it happen in the early stages of a play-in bracket. Plus, an angry proper revenge match sounds way too good to pass up on. On the other side of things, Toronto are still better than Washington, but I do see the scoreline being closer than last week, simply because Justice are probably going to feel extra motivated in defense of their coach and his recent comments, and they also want to beat these guys super badly, you can tell, so I'm kind of expecting a nail-biter, especially with the map picks. From there, my expectation is Vancouver are going to get eliminated very early thanks to meta discomfort. They've already proven they can keep things close with Toronto, but not close enough to indicate they'd be in the driver's seat at any point. That slow play style heavily favors Toronto, and Boston, no matter who they play, they're probably taking care of business. Both might be intriguing underdogs, like if they play Shock or London, there's a chance they could scare some people, but it's Boston. If they lost before even reaching the winners finals, they don't deserve anything at all. That's a rundown of the matches set to happen this weekend. As for my bracket as a whole, Boston and Toronto should be meeting in the upper bracket finals. That seems like the likely outcome. Upset potential is definitely present, but I'm pretty confident that Boston are ready. They did super well in closing out in the midseason knockouts, and they've shown time and time again that they're more so at the level of the big guns rather than these middling rosters. Although if Toronto did beat them, maybe not the most surprising outcome. The last couple of times they've played, the game has definitely been closer than the scores implied, and Toronto are not a bad matchup at all. They've pretty much been rivals since the Pro-Am, and there might be some extra pressure because of that. But Toronto still are a bit on the unproven side. Boston are the safer, more obvious choice. They should be getting out of this bracket relatively unscathed, so you'd have to imagine they get through the top bracket. In the lower bracket, I am all in on the Shock to face Toronto in the losers final. Proper ain't going down without a fight. There is no way. No matter who he faces, we're about to witness greatness. Be it London, Washington, Vancouver, Proper goes ham. Although, I don't think it matters too much who Defiant play. Be it in the upper or lower bracket, they are going to be advancing in my opinion. And if Boston made the lower bracket instead, it's even more Jover. It would take a major choke job for Toronto and or Boston to not qualify. But knowing my horrible luck with predictions, maybe I just sealed their fate. Anyway, that's my thought process on week 1 of the Western play-ins. Before I forget, the East knockouts are also about to finish up this weekend, so here's a quick glance at those predictions. In Bracket A, you'd have to imagine at this point the Spark are going to win this sucker uncontested. Dallas got absolutely steamrolled in the last one, and that's pretty much the only competition that stands in the Spark's way. Gushue beat the one-trick allegations, and if Hanbin is getting completely diffed by him as their carry, there's really no chance. In Bracket B, O2 go all the way. They've literally proven themselves against both of the teams currently in the losers bracket. They look extremely comfortable on this Junker Queen comp, plus Who Are You, Prophet, and Lee Soo-min on their comfort picks. If you can beat Soul Infernal in convincing fashion, mind you, who's to say that you couldn't do it a second time? It'd be fun if Prophet, Lee Soo-min, and Who Are You got the last laugh over their former OWL teams, but a tournament win might be meaningless. O2 have a legitimate opportunity to make the playoffs, but it only happens if, for one, the Dynasty somehow beat the Infernal. And that seems super unlikely given the drastically different stature of the two rosters. It's like Steph Curry going one-on-one in the post against Shaq. Hilarious as it would be, it's a long shot. In the scenario drawn out here, Soul Infernal would join the Spark in the playoffs later this month. And assuming Spark beat Dallas again, they'd have the top seed in the East due to a better average placement. However, if Spark lose and Infernal win, the script gets flipped. Am I expecting O2 Blast to necessarily take it? Probably not. I feel like Infernal are going to clap back somehow, but it would be pretty fun if a contenders team somehow memed on this region. Generally though, with a big overview, there's a chance for a lot of craziness in both regions this weekend. When the lights are at their brightest, sometimes people slip up and other people make the most of the opportunity. Either way, we finally get to weed out the good from the mid. Let's enjoy some good Overwatch this week. The future's uncertain. Might as well make the most of it.